Welcome to the Unbroken Arrows podcast, and I'm Greg, and today I'm flying solo as Catherine, as I alluded to at a previous podcast. She's got a very busy spring semester with school and work, so we will be happy when she's able to join, but we want the podcast to move forward. But today my guest is Patrick Durkin, and Pat has been a guest on our podcast before. And Patrick is an award-winning outdoor writer, a freelance newspaper columnist, and a general outdoors reporter. He is also the wildlife research contributing writer for Meat Eater, and I consider Patrick, I hope he feels the same way, a friend of the Unbroken Arrows podcast. So welcome back to the podcast, Patrick.
Well, thanks, Greg. It's always good to hear from you.
It's been a busy year for us. I'm sure it's been a busy year for you too. Any highlights in the world of hunting or outdoor activities?
No, I've only gotten out ice fishing once. It was so cold the last 10 days that I never got out once the last 10 days, but I get out right before it and got some small perch, but nothing worth bringing home. And I was deer hunting pretty much through the end of December. Ended up with 2 does this year is all I got for deer. But the one sad part was the second doe I got was tested positive for CWD, so that's never good. But yeah, I've been getting out.
Well, I really haven't hunted at all during the fall hunting season. Catherine took out her little sister Teresa and as on a mentor tag, and they harvested a doe. And to be quite honest, our freezer is full. So between the turkeys that they had last spring and the doe that they harvested here this fall, I think we need to work on drawing the freezer down a little bit before we go out. But I am going to go on a ice fishing trip up to the Lake of the Woods with my father-in-law coming up here in February. So I'm looking forward to that. I have not ever had fished many times in Minnesota with our lake cabin near Park Rapids, but I've never ice fished. So I'm looking forward to that. So
that should be fun, yeah.
Well, Patrick, after reading your article that's entitled Housing Projects, Build Better Housing for Bats and Birds to Control Pests and Insects, which was published in the November 1st issue of Outdoor News, I'd hoped that I'd be able to talk to you and have you come back on our podcast about this topic, because it's been one, for me anyway, at an early age. My mom and dad, they hung numerous bird houses and trees around our house, and mostly wren houses. My mom really liked to have wrens around. She liked to observe them, watch them. And we always had several bird baths, but I don't really recall, feeding birds with the way people do now and the way I do now. But with regard to birds in the backyard, did you start observing birds that way at an early age?
Yeah, my father always liked to put a bird feeder out, and then I also remember his brother, my Uncle Terry. He really was much more into the birding than my dad was, but I remember him make me recognize the connection between things like our backyard mulberry tree. When that thing would the fruit would ripen in the summer, he would just lay out in the lawn and watch those birds in the evening. And that kind of just caught my interest, that somebody would, like an adult, would find pleasure in lying in the backyard like that for an hour and just watching the birds as they came in to feed. So that, I don't know, I always had that memory of him. And then when my wife and I got married and I was out of the Navy, this was like, when I was about 25 years old, I started feeding birds. And even here in Eau Claire now, after we moved here 4 years ago, we brought our feeders along and stuck in the backyard. And I can't tell you how many times I swing through that part of the house just to look up the backyard and see what's out there. And so, usually you're not surprised, but every now and then you get something unusual, like we've had pileated woodpeckers come in, both sexes, different times. And this year we have a flicker showing up for the first time. So those kind of things are always just kind of fun to see.
You mentioned the pileated woodpeckers. Those are monsters. when you
Yeah.
compare them to most other woodpeckers. And when they start to go to town on a tree or a telephone pole that's nearby, it is a racket.
Hmm.
They're they're
Yeah.
they're, they're fun to observe, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I've written about woodpeckers over the years, it's always interesting. I'll hear from folks who they're typically peaceful people, I assume, but when a woodpecker starts going to work on their house siding, like people that have like log homes and wood, sometimes old barn board siding on their homes,
Hmm.
oh, it becomes war. They
Right,
are
right.
trying to keep those woodpeckers off, and I can't I don't remember all the different home remedies people would suggest, but it's always interesting that the different theories on what you could do to keep a woodpecker off the side of your house.
Well, it's a great story, in my opinion. If that does happen to you, I know it can be nerve wracking, and since it's never happened to me, I guess I don't get that. I can't see how you could get that aggravated, but
Yeah.
I know the first time I heard one, I had no clue what that was, and I had to go out and investigate, and was surprised to see my first pileated woodpecker. So.
Yeah. Very cool.
But, well, in your article, Patrick, you talk about that homeowners and landowners certainly know what types of pests are of concern in their yard and around their house, whether it's mice or insects, mosquitoes, flies. And this article was published in November, and so that was the onset of the winter time. And you make the point that then was, and it's still winter, I guess. So that's
Hmm.
the time to make a plan to provide homes and nesting boxes for native birds and flying mammals like bats. And you mentioned
Yeah.
Cornell's website as one of the sources for those. But, I think that, well, many publications, but boy, just a web search can yield thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of different sites that whatever it is that you're looking for, a nesting box for anything from a wood duck to a bat to any type of specific bird or an owl, you can find them. But you mentioned that now, during the winter, is the time to, if you have the time and the resource and you want to build a nesting box, this would be the time to do it, because now winter leads to spring, and then early spring is when you would put and install those nesting houses. So, how did this article come about for you? Was it an interest, or was it something that you heard people talk about, or how did the article come to be?
Yeah. It's what I always pride myself on as an outdoor writer is that no matter what the topic, I think I pride myself on being a good enough reporter to find the right people to, if I don't have the expertise, which I often do not, I can find people who can talk about this. And we're really, I think so often we're fortunate in our states to have wildlife agencies, universities, and these days the internet to do, searches on. But in this case, it started off as an assignment where the outdoor news had a real qualified full-fledged birder, a real ornithologist assigned to take on the article. But then he got a job right before his article was due, and they're suddenly left in the lurch. They didn't have this article, and they turned to me and see if I could help them out. And again, I felt like I could, one way or another, I can take care of this. So I got on the phone and talked to some different people and kind of got up to speed on things like owl nests and bat structures you can clamp, basically build and stick on the side of your chimney. And in the winter is a good time to do this stuff because the bats have cleared out, they've headed south, and so you can get up on that chimney. If you got to be careful about it, of course, but
Sure.
get up on the chimney, clean out whatever residue that bats left in there or got in there, and then find a way to keep them out this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the process, though, don't basically evict them, but create a better spot for them by building a bat house and mounting it on the side of the chimney. It's also a good time to do this. You can do the same thing. Deer hunters who are going out in the winter and post deer season maybe, and cleaning out your old permanent deer stands and fixing them up. It's a good time to mount, like these different structures on the side of the deer blind too. So it's just a good time to get out, and all these things can overlap for the true outdoorsman. That the guys who not only hunt, but they like bird watching, they like turkey hunting, and there's just so many things they can do. And I always call it, the deer hunters multitasking assignments. You can really keep yourself busy with all these winter projects.
Absolutely. The one of the things in the article that you mentioned, and you just mentioned it now about the attaching a bat house to your existing deer blind, and I mentioned that to Catherine, and she was like, that's genius, because when you go into what's one of the first things you have to do
Yeah.
with your deer blind is clean it out, and the flies and the
Yep.
insects that have accumulated, and that would definitely be a way to help control that as well.
Hmm.
But when it really comes down to it, whether it's a birdhouse or any of these nesting boxes, they all mimic natural cavities, which are
Yeah.
by far the most often used location for birds and even bats to nest in and to live in. And you mentioned that just the growing population, subdivisions being put up, even people that have existing woods, they remove the dead trees and the snags and
Yeah.
things like that. Those are all potential nesting spots for birds that are taken away.
Hmm.
So I'm originally from northeast Nebraska, and the yard that I grew up in was, well, all told, probably about 3 acres. And it was just a cacophony sometimes, I think, of woodpeckers and birds, chickadees, nuthatches, that you could get up in the morning and go out there and just listen for all of the different, and start to name the species that you could hear. But even then, as a child, I think as I grew older, those things started to decrease because we did take out some of the old trees, some of those
Yeah.
things that were naturally nesting. You also wrote an article a few years back about a particular family of chickadees that made their home in one of your 3D deer targets. So even without some of those types of things that are available, they still can make do, can't they?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that that to me is one of the more interesting discoveries I've had. That never saw it coming, and you know as I recall now, I think that was about 18 years ago. I was out in my backyard, and I used to live in Waupaca, Wisconsin. I had like about 4 or 5 deer targets out in the little woods behind my house. I could shoot anywhere from 15 yards to 60 yards. And so I'd make this little circuit. I'd shoot a few arrows in each target, and then go around and then pull the arrows out. And one day I came to the first target about 20 yards out, and as I approached, I thought I saw something fly out just right, really close to my face. And I looked around but couldn't see anything. Well, then the next day it happened again. This time I took a little more time and started hearing this bird calling nearby, and looked and saw this chickadee just really giving it to me. So I started thinking, you know, I must be disturbing a nest or something. This has happened 2 days in a row, and I looked around. Well, here, just kind of by accident, I looked underneath the deer's chin, the deer target's chin, and here, right in the throat patch, right below the jawbone, over what would be the jawbone on a real deer, there's this perfect little circle pecked out of the deer target, right on the throat patch. Like if you're trying to center punch that throat patch with like deer season, deer hunting, you couldn't have hit it more dead center than this bird had done. And I thought, well, how deep does this cavity go into that deer target? Because these 3D deer targets are made out of a kind of a polystyrene type foam,
Foam. Mm-hmm.
a hard foam, and that deer target, you could pull the head off of it. And so I carefully removed the head, and I didn't know for sure where the neck piece stopped and the little centerpiece that holds it in there began. And sure enough, here was like about a 6 or 8 inch hole right down the pipe of that, right down the neck of that target. And it was like about if you can picture like just the little, the cardboard, in the center of a toilet paper roll
Mm-hmm.
is about that length and width. And they just carved up this little cavity right down to the bottom. And here in the bottom was a little opening, a bigger cavity. And in that little cavity was 9 chickadee eggs. So I put the thing back together, and I called a friend of mine that at the time worked for this target manufacturer and told him about it, and it was like old news to them. They had
Really?
been getting these kind of comments from all sorts of their customers over the previous years. So it was a new thing for me, but I'd never read about it anywhere. I'd never seen anything about it. And this, of course, this is the days before smartphones, so you weren't
Mm-hmm.
watching videos on your smartphone. And so it was, for me, kind of a neat discovery. And that thing too, that when I wrote about it, that opened another little window into bird activity where a birding guy I know down in the Madison area, he was fascinated by it, and he actually started building a little bit bigger bird boxes, for like bluebirds and swallows and wrens, that these smaller type bird houses. And he'd cut a piece of styrofoam out and wedge it in there, and then mount it. And he said that he discovered along the way that it wasn't the chickadees that were carving that cavity out. It was actually woodpeckers in the winter. And then the woodpecker would it'd be a downy woodpecker usually. They'd open up that cavity and nest in there for a couple of days, but then they never ever returned in the spring to raise broods, that are fledgling
Huh.
in these cavities. It always ended up being chickadees, and sometimes bluebirds, and sometimes wrens, making use of that cavity.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, that's really interesting stuff that you stumble into sometimes.
Right. So then, do you speculate in that case that was the situation, that you think it was a woodpecker that made that opening in that cavity?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I never witnessed that,
Mm-hmm.
but it made sense, that a woodpecker would make real fast work of styrofoam like that. The chickadees had that little tiny little
Right.
beak
Right.
in comparison, where a woodpecker, anyone has watched the Harrys and the Downies and Violet, go to work, they just they're industrious birds, and they make small work of them with any project that involves, getting in there, and whether they're building a cavity for nesting or probing these rotting trees for insects and larvae and insect larvae.
Sure. Well, that answers the question that I had when I read your article, was, the amount of energy that they would have had to expend. I'm talking the chickadee, if they were the
Yeah,
ones that built that cavity, or opened up that cavity. Because if anybody
yeah,
has ever watched a chickadee at a feeder, I often
hmm,
wonder how they net out, with more calories than what they expend, because they'll come down and take one seed and
yeah,
flit away, eat that one seed, come back and get another one. So, but that's it. That is interesting. That's a
yeah,
serendipitous discovery there. So,
yeah. I've heard from I think his name is Gary Gard, if I'm not mistaken. But it's one of those fun things about being an outdoor writer. I have my own pet interests and things, but then when you get to meet other people who have they're just as passionate and just as obsessive as you are, but in a different way, and different things that they're interested in. Like Gary made a whole study, basically, but while turkey hunting, he's also a turkey hunter. He started realizing these connections between what he would see in the turkey woods, and what he noticed that bluebirds and turkeys often would hunt the same field edges and areas with, like where dirt was exposed, and
mm-hmm,
where
mm-hmm.
insects would come in the heat of the day, and be easy to pick off. So I just find that always fun and interesting to see how people will notice things that I overlook all the time.
Well, I used to teach biology and earth science, and my approach to both of those particular subjects was from an observational point of view, and it takes time and conscious effort to kind of get into the practice of that, because you can observe the world around you, whether we're talking nature and animals, and as a hunter, as a fisherman, and also with personal relationships. You can see how something is said by one person, how it impacts another,
Yeah.
and overall, whether we're talking about in that social setting or in the outdoor setting, it makes you a better person if you are a better observer. And
Hmm.
and I think that what you just talked about there, that's why think tanks and that's why people get together and have those discussions. If you don't, the way a person approaches something or thinks about something is completely different than what we do.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
and those are how advancement, discoveries,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
happen. Well, one of the
yeah.
things that you mentioned in your article, you talk about building nesting boxes for owls, and this was one of the things that I read the article back in November and put it in one of my files to get back to, and then just a few weeks ago, my brother Terry calls me and says, "Hey, I've got a project that I need some help to finish up, and if you're going to be around next week, maybe you could help me out." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, I've seen a great horned owl around, and I'm building an owl nesting box."
Wow.
So he now has a great horned owl, or well, he won't be offended if anything nests in it. To be quite honest, to
Right.
go into that work, but the different types of species of owls. Again, a lot of times people, since owls are very nocturnal and you don't see them by day very often, but they eat a tremendous amount of rodents. So they are definitely something that if they're in and around your property that can be beneficial. What's
Hmm.
different about an owl nesting box than, say, a traditional bluebird or any other type of bird nesting?
Boy, you're. See, this is where I would say. Well, to answer that, Greg, I'm gonna have to call one of my experts and get someone more qualified than me. But the smart aleck responses is they're definitely bigger.
Right, right.
And I guess I haven't built one myself, so I can't really tell you the differences. I really enjoy the idea that and I've seen it in my own two eyes here where I live, where you when you read about why biologists encourage people to be aware of what's in their backyard as far as the trees and
Mm-hmm.
how often we remove trees because of our needs and our fears. And I did it myself. When I moved here to Eau Claire, I hired a guy to come in and take down a big oak tree that was overhanging our house. And I'm glad I did, because when they got in the ground, you could see this thing was pretty well rotted out on the inside, and it was just a matter of time before it came down on our house. But at the same time, you could see where squirrels had been in there, and I couldn't find any evidence of like an owl or anything nesting in there, some of the smaller owls, but it was definitely being used to many different birds and squirrels but benefit. And and I take it down and get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it, I guess I can't help but feel a little guilty when I do that, do those kind of things. And if I think, I'm pretty sure if I would have found evidence of a bigger bird being in there, like an owl, that probably would have spurred me to go online and get a download some plans for that,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I've seen in our backyard over the years now. It's been 4 years living here, and looking out in the backyard. One year I remember spotting a great horned owl sitting up on a tree, and he sat there overnight. I saw him at dusk. Next morning I looked out, it was still sitting there, and eventually he flew off. And quite often in our neighborhood here, you can hear um, the old barred owls,
Mm-hmm.
hooting at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so the environment here seems pretty good for owls, and I assume that there's still enough bigger trees back in these little woods around me here in Eau Claire where they're finding places to nest. But I wish I could answer your question, but I just don't have the expertise when it comes to actual plans and how you go about building one.
Sure. Well, just what you said though now spurred another thought of mine that I came across someone when we talked or when I was researching different types of nesting boxes. This was a while ago. They made the suggestion that when you do cut down a tree and you come across a section like I just did, I cut down an old birch up at our cabin up in
Hmm.
Minnesota just this last summer, and there was about a 3 or 4 foot section that was hollowed out by something, and it was rotted on either side of that. And their suggestion was to not just burn it or throw it away or whatever, is cut off about a 2 foot, 2.5 foot section, and basically put a roof on it and put a floor on it that you can remove one of them to clean out at the
Yeah,
end of the season, but to drill a hole, if there's not a hole in the side, drill a hole in the side and put it up. And their contention was that something would find it and nest in it.
yeah, yeah.
So,
That's one of the things that I know when I came across these chickadees using my deer target. And then I think over the next couple of years, I think I had like two or three different chickadee nests in my different deer targets. But one of the things I came across in that whole discovery was the idea of taking like white cedar trees in Wisconsin are famous for having rotted centers,
mm-hmm.
and then birds hammering into them, woodpeckers getting into them, and opening up a hole so they can then nest in that cavity. And that's one thing that the chickadee people were pretty good about discussing and encouraging people to have those kind of opportunities when they see a cedar tree dying or near or dead. If you need to cut it down before you burn all the wood or do whatever do with the wood, check out the possibility of taking those 2 and 3 foot sections and capping the bottom, capping the top, and mounting them. Because chickadees you don't have to do build a high rise. Chickadees like to nest between 3 feet off the ground and no more than 10 feet off the ground. So, there's lots of little things like there's little nuances of how birds like the heights they like to be at, and all those kind of things that I find is just more you do this stuff, the more you hang around and talk to people who are into these things, you realize there's just so many cool distinctions between the different species and different bird species, different bird and animal species. That once you learn that, well, you put it here, here's what you might attract. You put it at this height, these birds might use it. So it's, I don't know, you can really make this a lot of fun.
And that's something that I learned, and I did not know when I read your article about the chickadees nesting in that 3D target, was that chickadees prefer to nest between 3 and 10 feet, usually above the ground.
Yeah,
And, that just, I did not know that. I just made the assumption that they would be nesting, more protection. 3 feet off the ground isn't too far. But
right.
that's something, again, that you have to, when you are trying to set up these nesting type boxes or houses or homes for them to live in, you need to know their behavior in order so you can actually attract them to the things that you're
Yeah.
trying to attract them to.
Hmm.
Well, when I was teaching, this was been many years ago already, but living in Nebraska, the Bluebirders Association of Nebraska, they had a project called Bluebirds Across Nebraska, and they helped any club or school or anyone like that wanted to put bluebird boxes up in an effort to attract bluebirds. Even the Outdoor News, I think each year they have a wood duck house plan that they publish in the outdoor magazine, and then encourage everybody to make it a family project. Build the
Hmm.
wood duck house and then put it up and send pictures of that. When you do those things, and part of the wood duck, I know the article that they talk about different ways to prevent predators to get up into the wood duck house. Likewise with the bluebirds, because there are predators, snakes, raccoons. There are different animals that will find their way to get up into those boxes and get to those eggs or get to the young hatchlings. So
Yeah.
uh, I would say, what types of research or what types of things should people be aware of with regard to specifics? Also,
Yeah.
like with bluebird houses, you should have them face east, and our weather predominantly approaches us from the west. So
Hmm.
facing east means that heavy rains are less likely to get into the box and affect the nesting. So, what types of things have you come across, or even in the articles that you've written about this? What types of things should people really need to do their homework beforehand?
I learned this firsthand was I kept when I lived in Wapaka my backyard bird feeder to keep squirrels off of it. All I did was put I got a bigger size of PVC pipe and put it around. I think I got like one of those 6-inch diameter PVC pipes and put this wooden stake that kept my feeder up. I dug it up in the spring and slid that PVC pipe over that basically about a 3-inch thick post
Mm-hmm.
and a cedar post, and then I put that PVC around it and mounted everything and put it back in the ground and filled it in and sturdied it up. And I was really content for a long time, thinking I had now baffled the squirrels. They can't get up anymore. Well, then one day I was looking out there, and it was getting to be late in the day, and this raccoon came in. And that raccoon had no trouble going up that PVC pipe. It just grabbed onto it and it kind of embraced it fully and went right up it, no problem at all. So I thought, well, that kind of took the wind out of my sails for a few days. And I
Yeah.
finally then I went up back and went down to the hardware store and got some regular steel stovepipe material, the flashing,
Mm-hmm.
and put that on, and that got them off. And with birdhouses, I know this friend of mine who built all these birdhouses for bluebirds and wrens and swallows. All he did, it was just a cool little thing he came up with, where he gets these regular old pipe, plumbing type pipe. It was never anything expensive, and then he'd get the kind that had like a little they're threaded on the end, or else he'd thread it himself, and then put this little mounting bracket on the bottom of the house, and they could just unscrew the house from the top of
Oh,
that little
sure.
stake
Mm-hmm.
when it came time to clean them all and fix them all up. Then he'd put them back out in the winter after cleaning them up. He'd take them down in the fall and clean them up and then bring them back in late winter and spring and put them back up. And so he liked the steel pipe for the most part. That was his little stock and trade, for keeping snakes off and keeping cats off of them. And they just, they can't, grip into that steel like they can wood, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes too that people can even get by with just regular old stakes, but the stakes sometimes have little raised bumps on that. Those animals can use that as leverage to get up them. So it's like anything real smooth and hard surface pretty much keeps most of the predators off those birdhouses.
Right, and the key word I think you just used is most, because nature will find a way.
Yeah.
A squirrel's resourceful, just as a raccoon is, and you
Yeah.
could do your best, but you might not. You might have to shift gears and try another method after they figure out the
Yeah.
way how you thought you were going to deter them. Well,
Yeah. When I was, I got to be real quick now. I'm sorry to cut you off.
oh no,
The one thing I found fun over the years with dealing with squirrels, I typically put out one of my feeders so the squirrels can, if they can defeat my baffles, which usually aren't too extensive, I let them have that one feeder.
Mm-hmm.
And that way they can fight among themselves about how to get up there. And they usually would figure it out. Like I tried things like these slinky type metal devices, and that would kind of keep them off for a couple of days. And then one of them would figure out that, well, if you just go at it and stay at it, you'll get up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then that once one squirrel sees one squirrel do it, then they copy it and they do it.
Right.
And then I learned too that they can. I learned that they can, have those feeders at least 4 feet off the ground. They can't jump from a standing start 4 feet up,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't jump. I think I measured it. I thought I figured out that you gotta get at least 10 feet between them and a spot where they can kind of take a running leap from an equal height. So over the years, I just would always go out and say, well, they can't jump from that distance. So how far is that? And then anytime I tried to inch it any closer to those kind of obstacles, they would find a way to get up there.
They will, and they aren't afraid of making a mistake. I watched a squirrel decide what branch they were going to jump from one tree to the next,
Uh-huh.
and the first attempt they landed on the ground, and they went
Yeah.
up, and it just looked like they were studying it like a physicist. And
Yeah.
sooner or later, it found the right branch to take off and leap and catch the branch on the next tree. So
Yep.
where there's a will, there's a way when it comes to
Oh,
Mother
yeah.
Nature.
Yeah. It's hard. Yeah. That's why I kind of decided years ago, rather than fight them nonstop, give them something, because it's hard not to admire their creativity and their determination.
Well, and my mother always says, Greg, they have to eat too. So,
Right.
the wise words from Mom.
Yep.
So, one of the things that you also mentioned in the article, and you just mentioned it a little while ago, that people often, I think, forget about, or maybe they just don't know, is you do have to care for, after you put up a nesting box, no matter what type of nesting box it is, you should care for it. You should clean it each year.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure you do due diligence, because oftentimes they won't be reused by the same species unless
Mm-hmm.
they are cleaned out. They're going to want to build a nest, a fresh nest, a new nest each particular year. So, what are some of the different things that, well, I think that you mentioned a different type of like a bleach concentration and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What types of things are used to clean out other than just, a little bit of work and elbow grease?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing, this one my go-to ornithologist here in Wisconsin, one works at the Department of Natural Resources. He's the statewide ornithologist for Wisconsin. Ryan Brady's his name. And then there's a retired professor now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Stan Temple. And the thing that I always remember, when I asked Ryan Brady about, bird houses and their care and feeders and their care, but he mentioned right away the number one problem so often with bird houses is that people put them up one spring, one winter, whatever it might be, and then they forget about them. They pretty much leave them alone after that, and that's, when you do that, eventually it doesn't take long for if a sparrow gets in there and plugs it up, that's never going to be used again anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And so he emphasized the idea of, once you start putting up bird houses, you got to get yourself in kind of an annual routine where you go out there in winter, and you don't have to go out there in the dead of winter when it's miserable out. You just, typically all of us, even though we live in the north, we all know there's going to be those weekends or weekdays where you get a nice day in the 30s and low 40s. And those are the days you go out and do these projects. But just make it a point and make it part of your lifestyle that you'll do this every winter. And then once you do it, though, there's always little things like, depending on the construction of your house, if it has hinges, check the hinges and lubricate them a little bit. If you're, if you have like a little flap for cleaning them out. And if you have a little screw eye in the top of it that holds the wire or whatever it might be, if you dangle it down from a branch, you make sure that thing's intact. It doesn't just, you don't want it to fall apart in the middle of summer when it's or in late spring, whatever it might be, when birds are in there nesting, you destroy the nest. So those little maintenance like that are important, and then cleaning the surfaces out, just pulling all the junk out, disposing of it properly, and then getting back in there with a little scrub brush. And the recommended thing usually is it's like 9 parts water, 1 part bleach,
Mm-hmm.
and then giving it a good rinse after you're done scrubbing everything out and cleaning everything out. And then if you like, like my neighbor over here, she always likes a nicely brightly painted birdhouse. So like every few years she would bring her birdhouses in and get them all, clean them up a little bit and then paint them again. And I never been one to worry about paint jobs on birdhouses.
Mm-hmm.
The ones I put up typically been cedar and stuff that don't really need a whole lot of paint over the years. But yeah, to each his own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I know that as a youth, my mom. I mentioned that my mom liked wren houses and liked to have wrens around, and I was amazed at that time that the hole to a wren house is the size of a dime,
Yeah.
and couldn't believe but that'll keep a sparrow out for a while anyway until maybe that hole wears away a little bit. But knowing what type of species that you want to attract and what type of nesting box you need to prepare is really important. The other thing is, ventilation in all of these nesting boxes are important because it gets hot, especially if the box is in partial sun or full sun. And then also drain holes to make sure that those things are clean and clear of debris because, even though you take the effort to try to keep water from getting in it, sometimes it could. And it's
Mm-hmm.
important that there's a source or a way for that water to drain out. So a lot of different things that people need to be aware of. And I really like, you mentioned it earlier about there are many types of outdoorsmen. And there are also different times of year. You may be, may love to fish, you may love to hunt, but there are periods of time where you can add, say, building nesting houses and caring for them into the yearly schedule because the natural ebb and flow of between seasons, there are times you can do that.
Yeah.
I like that approach.
Yeah. It's I always feel in so many ways that the work the job I've had for over 40 years now, it just puts you in contact with such a vast array of people, and the ways their interests overlap, and then the same person will have no interest in one thing, and another guy will have a ton of interest in it. And it just taught me over the years that how you mentioned earlier the things that we pick up on in conversation. And one of my little observations I've made about reporting, and you always hear the common expression, "There's two sides to every story."
Mm-hmm.
How many times do you hear that? And one of my early lessons, I bet it was like the first couple of years as a reporter, I learned by covering school board meetings and city council meetings that when I hear someone say there's two sides to every story, my common response is no, there's as many sides to the story as there are people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
They can all hear the same person talking, and then they all pick out little different things within that person's conversation or speech that rang true, and they thought that folks think that's the take home, that's their main point, and that's the key on, and that's what they remember, and they might miss everything else the person said. So to me, that's just instructive how we all we have these filters and we have these prisms we look through, and that really oftentimes determines what we take home from these discussions. And so I think I look at the same thing in the bird watching community and the things that some people really value the most, and how they set up their whole backyard to fit those interests.
Sure. Well, one of the things I mentioned earlier was that the observation side of things and how I tried to teach my students what ways that they could improve and become a better observer. Well, one of the things that I wanted to mention with this topic was that people do need to do a little bit of research in terms of, say, what birds are in their area. First off, you don't want to try to attract a bird that's not even anywhere near or make that your goal. But,
Yeah.
the different types of things that you just take for granted that are things you know and understand. And my story here is going to start one spring in Minnesota when I think it was two of my sons and I were up opening. And the mosquitoes were particularly bad. And one afternoon we were out on the little deck, and we probably were enjoying a cold beverage on a work break there. But we noticed that there were hundreds of thousands of dragonflies everywhere. And, on the birch trees, the white birch bark, and they were darker black type dragonflies. They were all over the place. And the next day or so, all three of us noticed that, the mosquitoes weren't necessarily as bad as they were days previous. Well, I just kind of put it away, filed that thought away. The next year is a little bit earlier in the year, and I was up there with at that time she would be my future wife, Stephanie, and the mosquitoes were bad again, horrible. Just the day that we were leaving was the first time I saw a dragonfly. And again, kind of put that into the file cabinet to let it, come back out when it was needed. Well, that same summer, we were up at her parents' lake home on Lake Ponset, and just sitting out in front of the lake and watching the boats go by, and a neighbor there had a purple martin house. And they were, by day, very busy feeding. And it wasn't until I really took a close look in terms of what they were bringing back, and I would say 90% of what they were bringing back to the martin house to feed their young were dragonflies.
Wow.
And, all of a sudden, all of these observations from the, previous few years started to come together, and I mentioned it to Stephanie, and she did a quick little research and found out that purple martins, against popular belief, really don't have an impact on mosquito populations. One of the things that they talked about was that they are actively feeding, not while mosquitoes are actively out and about, and that makes sense. By day as opposed to night. If you have dragonflies in the area, you may not, and mosquitoes are an issue. You may not want to have a purple martin house, because they will, based on my observation, they will eat, hundreds of dragonflies a day. So know what you want to try to control, and know the right predator that you want to try to encourage to be on your property to help decrease that. So just one of those stories that I guess help solidify. If you take time to observe and watch a little bit, maybe you'll learn something, right? But, and contrary to that, bats, are nocturnal feeders, and they, I think it's in your article you mentioned, they eat thousands of mosquito-sized insects per hour, as opposed to the hundreds that dragonflies eat throughout the day. And so.
Yeah. And I always wish now, after, as life moves along, I always remember my dad. This goes back 40 years. I'm assuming they still make these things, but I remember Dad was always proud of the idea that he had put out his purple martin houses and have like purple martins, and then with the same belief that they're going to be just chowing down on mosquitoes. And so but eventually he also put out one of these big bug zappers that Sears used to sell. And I'm guessing they probably still have them around. And he'd just get evenings of pleasure at dark listening to that bug zapper zap bugs. And he'd sit there drinking his hand and listen to that bug zapper going and watching a little spark every time one of them got hit. But then, this was on a lake house in central Wisconsin, and it didn't take long every few days for that bug zapper to zapped so many bugs that it basically just started kind of plugging up and not functioning anymore.
Right.
And then it became just this nonstop chore of keeping it clean. And eventually he gave up on it because it wasn't worth the trouble. And but then, at the same time, he was also always putting up swallow houses all over the yard. And
Mm-hmm.
after he died, my one of my nephews ended up getting that lake house, and but my nephew doesn't share the same um, fascination with swallow houses. So I think a lot of swallow houses have just kind of gone to the wayside now. But I, God, my dad must have hammered a box of nails into the side of the trees up on that place, keeping those swallow houses up all the time. But it's kind of cool to think that you don't get the pleasure, in his case anyway, of seeing those birds whacking mosquitoes because it's mainly being done at night.
Right.
But I think it's the idea that it's happening, that something's going out there, that you're kind of helping aid the system one way or another, whether it's purple martins, and because he loved the purple martins. He knew exactly when they'd come back every year,
Mm-hmm.
within a couple of days usually. It was pretty much on a schedule, and I never knew for sure if all his theories on why you put this house up and why you put that house up, if they're all really backed up by science. But he didn't need that. I think it was just half his pleasure was getting those things up there and keeping them up.
Right. Well, and the thing is, purple martins do eat insects. It's not a
Yeah,
situation that you shouldn't. If you have a place and you want to put a purple martin house up, all more power to you. Just
yeah,
don't think that it's going to be mosquitoes that they're really going
right.
to be.
Yeah,
Swallows the same way. Swallows are tremendous with regard to the eating, the number of
yeah,
insects that they eat. And of course, whether you've got cliff swallows and barn swallows and all the different species of swallows, but just drive by any bridge in the summertime and
yeah,
see the swallows swarming around. Well, they're all
yeah.
eating because they have to
Yeah, one,
live.
yeah. Well, the one thing I was going to say, and I forgot about it when we were talking earlier about owls, and keeping your neighborhood owl friendly, is there's some pretty good research that shows that when you have owls living in your woodlots and living in your backyards, basically, they do a pretty good job keeping they don't keep a lid on chipmunks and small rodents, voles or whatever it might be that's in the backyard. But anything you can do to keep those small mammals under control, it helps reduce the possibility of just having more ticks around,
Hmm.
and especially deer ticks. And like here in Wisconsin, we have a real problem in many parts of our state with the deer ticks and spreading Lyme disease.
Hmm.
So it's something I bet you I write about that every couple of years. The importance of what you can do in our limited capacity to help control tick numbers if you're in an area with where that's really a problem. And it's one of those little chain of events thing where the owls whack the little small mammals, and little small mammals aren't around as much then to carry the ticks around, and so it just helps interrupt some of those cycles that aren't always beneficial for us.
Right. It's the circle of life.
Yep.
Bottom line is and that's what the whole ecology of any of those particular animals, whether it's insects, it's predator prey relationship,
Hmm.
and when things get out of whack with regard to that predator prey, and oftentimes we don't think of it in terms of tick populations. We think of it more so like with maybe CWD with deer and things like that, but they're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And those things are important. And you know what? Putting up a nesting box is making a difference, pure and simple.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so No, and it's a great hobby too. It's something that someone can do and be active outdoors, and that's what we try to encourage with our podcast. Is, if you aren't getting outside like you want to, find a way to do it. It doesn't have to be hunting. It doesn't have to be fishing.
Hmm.
This is one of
Yeah,
those ways to become more active in the outdoors and really enjoy also the efforts of your labor, because birding is a wonderful pastime.
definitely.
Well, Patrick, I really appreciate the fact that you were able to take the time to visit with me today. I did come across an article of yours that I want to. I'm still doing some research on it, but you wrote an article about using crossbows and the impact of I think it was in Wisconsin, and you wrote about the number of crossbows being used was impacting deer population, impacting the amount of availability for, vertical bow hunters and things like that. And it's kind of a hot topic. Minnesota has been
Oh, yeah, sure.
a lot has been written there, and I've talked to some folks in Nebraska and South Dakota about it. So I'm still putting that particular show together, and
Okay.
Catherine has her opinions and I have mine, and so I'm trying to get as much information as we can to kind of discuss that. So maybe
Yeah.
if you're available when we get that together, I'll reach out to you and see if you might be available.
Well, I'll always be here.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Again,
You bet.
thanks for taking the time, and you take care.
Thanks, Greg. Good talking to you.
If you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or in need of crisis intervention, call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You have to remember that the world is a better place with you in it. Veterans and their loved ones can receive confidential crisis support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by contacting the Veterans Crisis Line. Dial 988, then press 1 to be connected to a Veterans Crisis Line responder. If you would rather, you can chat online at veteranscrisisline.net/chat, or you can text 838-255. To all our listeners, take some time to get outside, enjoy the outdoors, experience its healing powers. With that, on behalf of Catherine and me, until next time.